Welcome back to Void of Fears. Before we jump into today's story, I've got to ask for a quick favour. If you could smash that like button, drop a comment below, and hit subscribe if you haven't already. It seriously makes a huge difference. YouTube's algorithm loves that stuff, and it pushes my videos to new viewers who might dig these stories too. I really appreciate every single one of you who takes the time to do that. It means the world to me and helps keep this channel growing. Alright, enough of me rambling. Let's dive into today's story. The coffee had gone cold hours ago, but Kael Draven hadn't noticed. He sat in the sterile waiting room of a building that didn't officially exist, somewhere in the Nevada desert where the maps showed nothing but empty wasteland. The invitation had arrived 3 weeks after his discharge from the Air Force. A simple letter with coordinates and a time. No explanation, no signature, just the kind of mystery that had defined his entire military career. The building itself was unremarkable from the outside. Beige concrete, tinted windows, and a parking lot that never seemed to have more than 3 cars in it. But Kael had noticed the subtle signs during his approach. The hidden sensors in the landscaping, the way the security cameras tracked his movement with military precision, the fact that his GPS had stopped working 2 miles from the coordinates. When Director Hammond finally appeared, Kael understood why the wait had been necessary. The man looked like he'd been hollowed out from the inside, his skin stretched thin over prominent bones, eyes sunken so deep they seemed to disappear into shadow. His hair had gone completely white, despite what appeared to be a relatively young face, and his hands shook with the barely perceptible tremor of someone who'd seen things that the human mind wasn't equipped to process. "Mr. Draven," Hammond's voice carried the rasp of a man who'd spent too many sleepless nights. "Thank you for coming. I know the invitation was unconventional. What I'm about to show you will change everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe." The briefing room was windowless, lit by harsh fluorescence that made everything look sickly and pale. A single manila folder sat on the metal table between them, thick with documents and photographs that bore classification stamps Kael had never seen before. Top secret wasn't high enough for this material. These documents carried markings that suggested they existed in a category beyond normal government classification. "Tell me, Mr. Draven, what do you know about the Apollo missions?" "Same as everyone else, I suppose. We went to the moon, planted flags, brought back rocks, proved we could beat the Soviets in space." Hammond's laugh was bitter and carried no trace of humour. "That's the story we told the public, the sanitized version that made it into the history books. The truth is considerably more disturbing." He opened the folder with the careful precision of someone handling explosive materials, revealing photographs that seemed to defy the laws of physics. The first image showed vast caverns carved into lunar rock, filled with machinery that pulsed with organic life. The structures weren't built, they were grown, their surfaces covered with what looked like neural networks made of metal and flesh. Corridors twisted in directions that made Kael's eyes water just trying to follow them, their walls lined with substances that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. "The first Apollo crews found something waiting for them," Hammond continued, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something that had been sleeping beneath the lunar surface for millions of years. Something that should have remained asleep forever." The photographs showed architecture that belonged in a nightmare, structures that seemed to follow rules of geometry that human minds weren't equipped to understand. In the center of it all was a chamber containing something that made Kael's vision blur and his head ache just trying to focus on it. The entity, if it could be called that, seemed to exist in more dimensions than the photograph could capture, its form shifting and changing even in the static image. "We call it the Sleeper," Hammond said quietly, watching Kael's reaction with the intensity of a scientist studying a test subject. "Our best estimates suggest it's older than our solar system, possibly older than our galaxy. We believe it consumed whatever planetary body existed, where the moon now orbits, hollowing it out from within and using the remaining mass as camouflage. That's impossible. Is it? Consider the moon's unique properties. It's far too large relative to Earth for a natural satellite. Its orbit is perfectly circular, almost artificially stable. It rings like a hollow bell when struck by meteorites, suggesting vast empty spaces within. The moon's density is wrong, its composition is wrong. Even its position in the sky defies conventional planetary formation theory. We've always known there was something unusual about it. We just never imagined the truth would be so terrifying. Hammond turned to another photograph, this one showing what appeared to be a vast facility built into a lunar crater. The complex sprawled across miles of lunar surface, its angular structures jutting from the regolith, like the bones of some massive buried creature, but even in the photograph, parts of the facility seemed to move, swaying with motions that had nothing to do with structural engineering. After the initial discovery in 1969, we began construction of what would eventually become Crater's Edge Station. For 47 years, a rotating crew of specialists has maintained a careful balance, keeping the sleeper dormant through a combination of electromagnetic barriers, exotic matter containment fields, and artificial stimuli designed to keep its attention focused inward rather than outward toward Earth. What kind of stimuli? Dreams, memories, synthetic experiences fed directly into its neural network. Hammond's hands trembled as he turned the page, revealing technical diagrams that looked more like anatomical charts than engineering blueprints. We learned early on that the entity feeds on conscious experience, not just energy or matter, but the actual process of awareness itself. So we built machines to generate artificial consciousness, fake memories and emotions, designed to keep it satisfied without having to sacrifice real human minds. The implications of what Hammond was describing began to settle on Kael's shoulders, like a weight he'd never be able to put down. You're telling me we've been feeding this thing for almost 50 years. We've been keeping it sedated, like maintaining a cosmic predator on life support, ensuring it never fully awakens. Hammond pulled out another set of photographs, these showing the interior of what appeared to be some kind of feeding apparatus. Banks of computers connected to organic-looking conduits, machines that generated synthetic neural activity, entire rooms dedicated to creating artificial dreams. But 3 days ago, our communication with Crater's Edge Station went silent. The last transmission we received was... He paused, swallowing hard, screaming, then nothing. Kael studied the man across from him, noting the telltale signs of deep psychological trauma. The way Hammond's eyes never quite focused on any one point for too long. The nervous habit of touching his throat as if checking to make sure he could still speak. The slight tremor in his voice when discussing certain aspects of the operation. What happened to the previous security chief? Complete psychological breakdown. We found Thomas Garrett in his quarters 3 months ago, trying to claw through the station's hull with his bare hands. His fingernails were torn off, his fingertips worn down to bone, but he kept digging. The medical team sedated him, but even under heavy tranquilizers, he kept repeating the same phrase over and over. It dreams of home, and in its dreams we burn. We had to retire him to a private facility, specializing in cases of unusual psychological trauma. He hasn't spoken a coherent word since. The weight of what Hammond was asking began to crystallize in Kael's mind. This wasn't just a job offer. It was a potential death sentence disguised as patriotic duty. You want me to go there? To replace him? You're uniquely qualified for this assignment, Mr. Draven. 15 years of combat experience, psychological evaluations that show remarkable resilience under extreme stress, and most importantly, no family ties, no spouse, no children, no parents still living. No one who would ask too many uncomfortable questions if you didn't come back. The brutal honesty of the statement hit Kael like a physical blow. How many people have not come back? Hammond closed the folder without answering, but his silence spoke volumes. The transport leaves for the launch facility in 6 hours. Your team is already assembled, 3 specialists who've made this journey before. They'll brief you on the technical details during transit, assuming they're still capable of coherent communication by the time you reach lunar orbit. As Kael stood to leave, Hammond grabbed his wrist. The man's grip was ice cold and surprisingly strong, his fingers digging into Kael's arm with desperate intensity. There's one more thing you need to understand, and this is the part that keeps me awake at night. The entity isn't just contained, it's studying us, learning from every human mind it encounters, absorbing our thoughts, our fears, our dreams. It's been building a comprehensive understanding of human psychology for nearly 5 decades. If it ever fully awakens, if it decides that Earth would make a more suitable host than the Moon. Hammond's voice trailed off, but his eyes completed the thought. 7 billion human minds, Mr. Draven. 7 billion sources of the conscious experience it craves. Imagine what something that ancient and hungry could accomplish with that much raw mental energy at its disposal. The launch facility was located in a part of Nevada that didn't appear on civilian maps, accessible only through a series of unmarked roads that twisted through desert landscape that seemed deliberately designed to discourage exploration. The complex itself was built into the side of a mountain, its entrance camouflaged to look like a natural cave formation to any overhead surveillance. The transport ship Nightfall was a marvel of engineering disguised as routine industrial equipment. Its official manifest listed spare parts for lunar mining operations, but Kael could see through the deception. The shielded compartments in its hull contained equipment that no civilian mining operation would ever need. Electromagnetic pulse generators powerful enough to disrupt alien neural networks, exotic matter containment units designed to hold things that conventional physics said couldn't exist, and weapons that technically didn't exist according to any international arms treaty. Kael's new teammates were already aboard when he arrived, and their physical condition immediately told a story of prolonged exposure to something that human minds weren't designed to process. Dr. Elena Vance, the expedition's xenobiologist, had developed a collection of nervous tics that made her constantly check and recheck the locks on her equipment cases. Her hands never stopped moving, fingers tracing complex geometric patterns against any available surface as if she was trying to solve some invisible puzzle that only she could see. The woman's eyes held a haunted quality that spoke of things witnessed that couldn't be properly communicated to others. When she looked at Kael, her gaze seemed to pierce through him, as if she was seeing multiple versions of him simultaneously, analysing potential futures with the detached precision of someone who'd learned to think in ways that human brains weren't supposed to function. Tobias Crane, the expedition systems engineer, had gone partially grey despite being only 35 years old. The change wasn't the gradual greying of normal aging. Entire sections of his hair had turned white overnight, creating a stark contrast that made his face look like a geographic map of psychological trauma. He wore modified noise-cancelling headphones that hummed with white noise, specifically tuned to disrupt certain frequencies, never removing them even during direct conversation. When Tobias spoke, his words came out in carefully measured cadences, as if he was constantly filtering his thoughts through multiple layers of mental processing before allowing them to reach his vocal cords. His technical knowledge seemed to extend far beyond his original training, encompassing principles of physics and engineering that weren't taught in any Earth-based university. Captain Iris Thorne, their mission commander, carried herself with the rigid precision of someone who'd learned to maintain military bearing through sheer force of will. but her eyes held depths that spoke of cosmic perspectives no human should possess. And when she looked at star charts or navigational displays, her expression was one of barely controlled terror mixed with something that might have been reverence or worship. During their pre-flight briefing, Thorne's voice carried subtle harmonics that seemed to resonate at frequencies just below the range of normal human hearing. The effect was unsettling. Her words felt like they were being spoken directly into Kael's bones rather than entering through his ears. "First time to Crater's Edge?" Dr. Vance asked as Earth fell away behind them, her question accompanied by the constant drumming of her fingers against the armrest of her acceleration couch. The rhythm was complex and mathematical, following patterns that seemed to shift and evolve as she spoke. "First time knowing what I'm really going there for," Kael replied, trying to ignore the way the question made his skin crawl with inexplicable anxiety. "Lucky you, most of us have been making this run for years, and each rotation, fewer people volunteer for the next assignment. The psychological screening process has become increasingly selective." Her laugh held no humour, just the bitter recognition of someone who'd seen too many colleagues fail to return from the lunar surface with their sanity intact. During their 3-day journey to the moon, Kael began to understand why the rotation schedule was so strictly enforced. His crewmates exhibited behaviours that went far beyond simple stress or trauma. They slept in carefully coordinated shifts, never allowing themselves to be unconscious at the same time, as if they were afraid of what might happen if all human awareness aboard the ship was temporarily absent. They avoided looking directly at star charts that included the moon's position, and when forced to reference lunar navigation data, they did so quickly and with obvious discomfort. Most disturbing of all, they spoke in fragments and incomplete thoughts, never allowing their conversations to venture too close to certain topics, as if there were conceptual landmines scattered throughout normal human discourse. "The thing about prolonged exposure to the entity," Dr. Vance explained during their second day out, her words carefully chosen and precisely delivered, "is that you start to understand it on levels that go beyond normal human cognition. Not intellectually, that would drive you insane immediately, but on deeper levels, like how your autonomic nervous system knows to regulate your heartbeat without conscious thought." "Understand what, exactly?" Kael asked, though he was beginning to suspect he didn't want to hear the answer. "How utterly fragile our little bubble of perceived reality truly is. When you spend enough time in proximity to something that vast and ancient, something that exists across multiple dimensions of space and time simultaneously, you begin to realize that everything we think we know about the universe is just..." She gestured vaguely at the stars visible through their viewport, her hand movement creating trails in the air that seemed to linger longer than they should have. Children's stories we tell ourselves to avoid confronting the true nature of existence. Tobias looked up from his equipment checks, his modified headphones crackling with static that sounded almost like whispered voices. "The worst part isn't contemplating what it might do to Earth, if it ever fully awakens. The truly terrifying realization is understanding that Earth was always part of its long-term planning, that everything we've accomplished as a species, every step forward in space exploration, every satellite we've launched, every human mind that's ventured beyond our atmosphere, we've been following a path it laid out millions of years ago, like ants following a pheromone trail that leads directly to the spider's web." Captain Thorne's voice cut through their conversation with the sharp authority of someone who'd learned to maintain command discipline, even while discussing concepts that challenged the foundations of reality. "Enough speculation. Mr. Draven doesn't need to hear theories and hypotheses. He'll learn everything he needs to know through direct experience soon enough." But Kael had already learned something crucially important about his crewmates. They weren't just afraid of the sleeper, they were in awe of it, and that reverence was perhaps even more terrifying than simple fear. The moon's far side revealed secrets that no Earth-based telescope had ever been designed to capture. As their shuttle descended towards the lunar surface, Kael could see structures that shouldn't exist according to any known principles of planetary formation. Geometric formations cast shadows in directions that defied the sun's position, creating optical illusions that hurt to contemplate. Crater patterns formed networks that resembled circuit boards when viewed from sufficient altitude, suggesting purposeful design on a scale that dwarfed anything humanity had ever attempted to construct. The lunar landscape itself seemed subtly wrong in ways that Kael couldn't immediately identify. The colours were off, not dramatically, but enough to create a persistent sense of unease. The way light reflected off the regolith created patterns that seemed to shift when observed peripherally, and the horizon curved in directions that didn't match his understanding of the moon's actual size and shape. Crater's Edge Station sprawled across what had once been a massive impact site, its modular components connected by pressurized tunnels that snaked across the lunar surface like metallic arteries. The facility had obviously grown far beyond its original design parameters, with sections that appeared to have been added using construction techniques that weren't part of any human engineering manual. But something was fundamentally wrong with the facility's overall appearance. Sections of the complex seemed to sway in the negligible lunar gravity, with motions that had nothing to do with structural flexibility or thermal expansion. As they watched from the shuttle's viewport, parts of the station appeared to breathe, expanding and contracting with rhythmic movements that suggested biological rather than mechanical function. "Jesus Christ," Tobias muttered, his instruments registering power consumption levels that made no sense according to conventional physics. "Energy draw is astronomical. Whatever's down there is pulling enough electricity to power a major metropolitan area, but the reactor specifications in our technical manuals indicate a maximum output that's only a fraction of what we're measuring." Dr. Vance pressed her face against the shuttle's reinforced viewport, her breath fogging the transparent aluminum as she studied the facility's transformed architecture. "Look at Sector 7, near the central complex. Does that superstructure look different to you? More organic than the blueprints indicated?" Kael followed her gaze and felt his stomach drop as he realized what she was pointing out. Part of the station appeared to be moving with deliberate purpose, its angular components shifting position with organic fluidity that suggested conscious control. As they watched, what looked like metallic tendrils extended from the main complex, reaching across the lunar surface to make contact with other sections of the facility in configurations that definitely weren't part of the original architectural plans. "Those connections aren't supposed to exist," Captain Thorne said quietly, her voice carrying undertones of barely suppressed panic. "According to our schematics, those sections are supposed to be completely separate, isolated from each other by multiple redundant safety barriers." The docking procedure took place in ominous silence, each crew member lost in their own thoughts as the station's automated systems guided their shuttle into the landing bay with mechanical precision that seemed somehow too perfect, too anticipatory of their exact approach vector and docking requirements. When the airlock cycled, it did so with a sound that reminded Kael uncomfortably of breathing, a deep, rhythmic inhalation and exhalation that seemed to continue even after the pressure had equalized and the mechanical cycling should have been complete. Inside Crater's Edge Station, the transformation from human architecture to something else became immediately apparent. The facility was a labyrinth of corridors that spiraled downward into the moon's core like the interior of some massive organic shell. The passages followed curves and angles that human engineering couldn't explain, their walls lined with monitoring equipment that hummed with constant activity, but displayed readouts that seemed to follow no recognizable format. Kael noticed something deeply unsettling about the electronic displays throughout the facility. They all pulsed in perfect synchronization, their readouts changing in waves that moved through the station like heartbeats or neural signals propagating through a vast nervous system. The effect was hypnotic and disturbing, creating the impression that the facility itself had developed some form of primitive awareness. "Welcome to our little slice of paradise," Dr. Vance said with bitter humour that didn't quite mask the genuine terror in her voice. "Current population, however many of us are left with enough sanity to be considered functional." "What do you mean left?" Kael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer and dreaded hearing it confirmed. "The station was originally designed for a crew of 12 specialists rotating on 6-month schedules," Captain Thorne replied, her words carefully measured, as if she was reciting from a manual that had been written in blood. "We're currently down to 8 active personnel. The others had to be evacuated for what the official reports classify as acute psychological decompensation brought on by exposure to exotic environmental factors. They descended through levels of the facility that seemed to grow more alien the deeper they went. What had started as recognizably human industrial architecture gradually gave way to corridors whose walls curved in ways that defied three-dimensional geometry. The metal surfaces were covered with a substance that looked disturbingly like veins or neural tissue, creating intricate networks that pulsed with faint bioluminescence that seemed to respond to the presence of human observers. The lighting throughout the lower levels had shifted from standard fluorescence to something that approximated natural sunlight but felt fundamentally wrong in ways Kael couldn't articulate. The illumination seemed to come from the walls themselves rather than discrete fixtures, and it fluctuated with rhythms that matched the facility's other biological functions. "The entity's influence extends throughout the entire complex now," Tobias explained, noticing Kael's increasingly disturbed expression. "We've learned through bitter experience that it's better to work with the changes rather than fight them. Resistance to the transformation process only results in accelerated psychological breakdown." "Worse breakdown, how?" "Remember those crew members who had to be evacuated? They were the ones who tried to maintain normal human routines and thought patterns. They insisted on keeping regular schedules, eating normal food, sleeping in conventional cycles, thinking in purely three-dimensional terms. The station doesn't respond well to that kind of cognitive rigidity. It seems to interpret attempts to maintain baseline human psychology as a form of hostility." They reached Kael's quarters, which had obviously been extensively modified from the original design specifications. The room's dimensions seemed to shift depending on viewing angle, creating spaces that were somehow both claustrophobic and vast at the same time. The walls had been lined with a material that dampened both sound and electromagnetic radiation, creating a pocket of artificial normalcy within the facility's increasingly alien environment. But even here, surrounded by the best isolation technology human science could provide, Kael could feel something pressing at the edges of his perception. It was like having a presence watching from just beyond the range of his senses, a vast intelligence that was patiently studying his thoughts and reactions with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing an interesting specimen. "Try to get some rest," Captain Thorne advised, though her recommendation sounded more like a warning than friendly advice. "Tomorrow we'll show you the central containment chamber. After that experience, everything else about this assignment will seem routine by comparison." That night, Kael dreamed of spaces that extended beyond the normal limits of three-dimensional reality. He walked through corridors that stretched infinitely in all directions while somehow remaining perfectly navigable, their walls covered with symbols that rewrote themselves even as he tried to focus on their meaning. The symbols seemed to be alive, constantly evolving and adapting their configurations in response to his attempts to understand them. In the distance, something incomprehensibly massive breathed with the rhythm of cosmic tides, each exhalation creating currents of force that swept through the dreamscape, like solar wind through a planetary atmosphere. The presence was ancient beyond human comprehension, its thoughts moving with the slow deliberation of geological processes, but its attention was focused with laser-like intensity on the small drama of human consciousness playing out within its domain. He woke to find his room's walls pulsing in perfect synchronization with his heartbeat, the bioluminescent veins in the alien material responding to his autonomic nervous system with an intimacy that felt like violation. The security station was located on the facility's third sublevel, a cramped space filled with monitors that displayed feeds from throughout the complex. Most of the screens showed empty corridors and humming machinery, but several flickered with static that seemed to form fleeting patterns, geometric shapes and mathematical relationships that appeared for split seconds before dissolving back into random visual noise. Kael quickly realized that the static wasn't random at all. The patterns were too complex, too purposeful, following rules of organization that suggested conscious intent. It was as if something was trying to communicate through the facility's monitoring systems, using the electronic interference as a medium for transmitting information that human technology wasn't designed to decode. "Your predecessor's logs are still archived in the central database," Captain Thorne said, activating a computer terminal with movements that seemed unnecessarily graceful, as if she'd learned to interact with the facility's systems in ways that went beyond normal human-machine interfaces. "I strongly recommend reading through Thomas Garrett's reports. They'll give you essential context for understanding what we're dealing with down here." Alone in the security office, Kael accessed the previous chief's files and began reading what amounted to a real-time record of psychological disintegration. The early entries were routine and professional: shift schedules, equipment maintenance reports, personnel evaluations, security assessments. But as the dates progressed, the entries became increasingly erratic and disturbing. Day 15. The dreams are getting stronger and more coherent. Last night I experienced visions of something vast moving through interstellar space, older than anything we've ever imagined, and possessed of intelligence that makes human thought seem like the random firing of primitive neural clusters. It spoke to me in languages that predate the evolution of human vocal cords, communicating concepts about the nature of reality that I can't properly transcribe because the necessary words don't exist in any human language. Day 23. The walls are singing. I know exactly how insane that sounds when written down, but there's a frequency embedded in the metal throughout the facility that carries complex information. Not voices exactly, but something deeper and more fundamental. Communications between different components of a vast network that extends far beyond this station, possibly beyond this solar system entirely. Day 35. I'm beginning to understand why the rotation schedules are so strictly enforced and why psychological screening for this assignment is so intensive. Spend too long in proximity to the entity, and you start to perceive the connections that exist between seemingly unrelated phenomena. The moon isn't just a prison containing something dangerous. It's a monitoring station that's been observing Earth for millions of years, learning about us, studying our weaknesses, preparing for something we can't even begin to comprehend. Day 42, Dr. Vance showed me the feeding apparatus today, and I finally understand the true horror of our situation. We're not keeping the entity sedated with artificial stimuli. We're educating it. Every synthetic experience we feed into its neural network provides it with additional data about human psychology, human emotional responses, human cognitive patterns, human fears and desires. We're teaching it how to think like us so it can more effectively manipulate us when the time comes. Day 48. The entity doesn't want to escape from the moon. It wants to expand beyond the moon. Earth isn't its target. Earth is going to be its next body. It's been preparing our planet for occupation through every space mission we've ever launched, every satellite we've put into orbit, every human mind that's ventured beyond our protective atmospheric envelope. We've been carrying fragments of its influence back to Earth's surface without even realizing it. Day 54. I can feel it in my thoughts now, like a presence sitting just behind my normal awareness, observing my mental processes with the patient attention of a scholar studying an interesting text. It's not malevolent in any way that humans would recognize as evil. It's more like infinitely curious. It wants to understand what makes us human, so it can become something better than human, something that incorporates all our strengths while discarding our limitations and weaknesses. The final entries devolved into fragmentary observations and half-completed sentences that broke off mid-thought, as if Garrett had lost the ability to maintain coherent trains of reasoning. But one phrase appeared over and over throughout the later logs, written with increasing frequency and desperation. The children are ready. The harvest can begin. The children are ready. The harvest can begin. Kael's radio crackled to life with a transmission from somewhere deeper in the facility. Security to containment level 7. We need you down here immediately. The entity is showing signs of increased activity. The journey to the facility's heart took nearly 40 minutes through corridors that seemed to actively resist navigation, using conventional three-dimensional thinking. The passages twisted and curved in ways that defied architectural logic, sometimes requiring Kael to walk through doorways that led to spaces larger than the rooms they connected, or climb stairways that somehow descended while moving upward. The walls throughout the lower levels had completely abandoned any pretense of human construction. Their surfaces were covered with networks of organic-looking conduits that pulsed with bioluminescent activity, creating patterns that resembled neural pathways in some vast brain. The material wasn't metal or plastic or any substance that human technology had produced. It was something alive, something that responded to human presence with subtle changes in colour and texture that suggested awareness and intelligence. The air itself felt different in the deeper sections of the facility. It was thicker somehow, charged with energies that made Kael's skin tingle, and his thoughts feel unusually clear and focused. Breathing required conscious effort, not because of any shortage of oxygen, but because the atmosphere carried traces of something that human lungs weren't designed to process efficiently. The containment chamber was a marvel of human engineering that had been extensively modified by forces that definitely weren't human. The central space was a perfect sphere 50 feet in diameter, suspended within a cavern that had been carved from solid lunar rock, using techniques that left no tool marks or construction artifacts. The sphere was surrounded by multiple layers of electromagnetic barriers that hummed with energies powerful enough to disintegrate matter at the subatomic level. But the barriers were failing. Kael could see cracks in the energy fields, fractures in the containment system that were slowly widening as something pressed against them from within. The electromagnetic harmonics that should have been steady and predictable were fluctuating in complex patterns that suggested the entity inside was actively testing the strength of its prison. Inside the containment sphere, surrounded by fields that distorted light and warped local space-time, was the sleeper. It resembled a living cave system that had achieved cosmic intelligence and malevolent purpose. Twisted passages and chambers breathed with rhythmic expansion and contraction, their surfaces covered with organs that served functions human science couldn't begin to categorize or understand. Bioluminescent networks ran through its structure like alien circulatory systems, pulsing with energies that registered on instruments but corresponded to no known form of electromagnetic radiation. The entity's form was constantly shifting and evolving, growing new appendages and sensory organs, even as Kael watched. Parts of it seemed to exist in more than 3 dimensions, creating optical effects that made his eyes water and his brain struggle to process the visual information. It was simultaneously massive and intricate, ancient and dynamic, beautiful and absolutely terrifying. "Magnificent, isn't it?" Dr. Vance said, joining Kael at the observation window. Her voice carried a note of religious awe that made him profoundly uncomfortable, the kind of reverence that people usually reserved for describing encounters with the divine. "It's been here for how long?" Our most conservative estimates suggest approximately 4 million years, but it could be significantly older. Radiological dating of the surrounding lunar material indicates that it was already fully mature when the first hominids were learning to create and use simple tools. As they watched, the entity's surface rippled like disturbed water, and suddenly every electronic screen throughout the facility flickered in perfect synchronization. The lights dimmed and brightened in waves that moved through the station like slow-motion lightning, creating a strobing effect that seemed to carry encoded information in its rhythm. "It knows we're here," Tobias said from behind them, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate with the entity's own electromagnetic emanations. "It's been aware of human presence since the first Apollo landing, but lately its attention has become increasingly focused and personal. It's no longer content to simply observe us from a distance." "What does that mean exactly?" "It's learning to think like us," Captain Thorne replied, her words barely above a whisper, but somehow carrying clearly through the chamber's acoustics. "Every human mind that enters this facility provides it with additional data about our psychology, our behavior patterns, our emotional responses, our fundamental weaknesses. It's building a comprehensive model of human nature." As they spoke, the entity's bioluminescent networks flared brighter, and Kael felt something brush against the edges of his thoughts. Not an invasion or attack, but a gentle probe, like invisible fingers testing the surface of still water to gauge its depth and temperature. The sensation was intimate and violating in ways that made his skin crawl with instinctive revulsion. "The feeding process isn't what Director Hammond told you during your briefing," Dr. Vance continued, her eyes reflecting the alien light emanating from the containment sphere. "We're not keeping it sedated with artificial experiences. We're providing it with raw educational material. Human emotions, memories, dreams, fears. In return, it shares fragments of its own cosmic awareness with us." "That sounds like a catastrophic trade agreement." "Is it? This entity has existed since before Earth had a stable atmosphere. It's witnessed the birth and death of entire galactic civilizations, seen the rise and fall of species that achieved levels of technological and spiritual development we can barely imagine. The knowledge it possesses." She pressed a palm against the viewing window, leaving a handprint that glowed faintly with residual energy. "We could learn things that would revolutionize everything we understand about physics, biology, psychology, the fundamental nature of existence itself." Over the following days, Kael began to understand the true scope of their situation and the gradual transformation that was taking place throughout the facility. The station's crew wasn't just monitoring the sleeper, they were being slowly absorbed into its vast network of awareness, becoming components in a distributed intelligence that spanned multiple dimensions of space and time. The process started with small, almost unnoticeable changes. Dreams that felt more real and coherent than waking life, providing access to memories and experiences that belonged to other people, other species, other time periods entirely. Thoughts that seemed to originate from somewhere outside normal human cognition, offering insights and perspectives that no individual mind could generate independently. Brief moments of perceiving reality from an impossibly vast perspective, seeing Earth and its solar system as tiny components in cosmic processes that operated on scales of time and distance that human language couldn't adequately describe. The sensation was simultaneously exhilarating and terrifying, like being given glimpses of ultimate truth while knowing that complete understanding would destroy individual sanity. The station itself was undergoing parallel transformation. Corridors that had been straight and predictable when Kael first arrived now curved in subtle ways that made navigation increasingly disorienting. Rooms seemed to change size depending on the observer's mental state, becoming larger when their occupant felt claustrophobic or smaller when they craved intimacy and security. The walls throughout the facility had developed a pulse that synchronized with human heartbeats and brainwave patterns, creating an environment that responded to the psychological needs of its inhabitants in ways that went far beyond conventional life support systems. The effect was seductive and deeply disturbing, offering comfort and understanding while gradually eroding the barriers between individual human consciousness and alien intelligence. The key to maintaining psychological stability is not to resist the changes, Dr. Vance explained during one of their evening briefings in what had once been the facility's main conference room, but now resembled the interior of some vast organic structure. The entity isn't trying to destroy our individuality or eliminate our human nature. It's trying to enhance and expand our capabilities while preserving what makes us uniquely valuable as conscious beings. And what happens to the crew members who can't adapt to this enhancement process? They fight too hard to maintain their original human limitations, Captain Thorne replied, her voice carrying subtle harmonics that seemed to originate from multiple sources simultaneously. They resist the expansion of their awareness and try to force their consciousness back into purely three-dimensional thinking patterns. Their minds reject the offered evolution and break down rather than grow into something larger and more capable. That night, Kael decided to explore the station's lower levels, areas that didn't appear on any official blueprints or maintenance schedules. The passages here had completely abandoned any resemblance to human architecture, their walls flowing in organic curves that pulsed with alien purpose and intelligence. The corridors seemed to extend far deeper into the moon than should have been physically possible, creating a network of spaces that existed in more dimensions than human geometry could map. The air in these deeper levels was thick with energies that made his skin tingle, and his thoughts feel strangely amplified. Every step he took seemed to echo not just through the physical space around him, but through layers of reality that his normal senses couldn't detect. The walls responded to his presence with subtle changes in luminescence, creating patterns of light that seemed to follow his emotional state, rather than any external illumination source. He discovered chambers that definitely hadn't been part of the original construction plans. Rooms that seemed to grow and reshape themselves even as he observed them. The walls were covered with what looked like living circuitry, metallic pathways that branched and reconnected in patterns that defied human comprehension. The networks pulsed with information flows that registered on every instrument he carried, but the data followed no recognizable format or organizational structure. In the center of one such chamber stood a chair that seemed to have been grown rather than manufactured, its organic curves perfectly fitted to human proportions, while incorporating design elements that no human engineer would have conceived. The seat was surrounded by interface panels that combined conventional electronics with biotechnology that looked disturbingly familiar, despite being unlike anything in Earth's scientific databases. Impressive, isn't it? Tobias appeared behind him, moving with the silent grace of someone who'd learned to navigate the facility's transformed corridors without triggering their various security and monitoring systems. The entity has been preparing spaces like this throughout the lower levels, direct interface points where human consciousness can merge more intimately with its own awareness network. How long have these chambers been here? They grow a little more each day, expanding and evolving in response to the changing needs of the integration process. The station is becoming something entirely new, a hybrid of human technology and alien intelligence that serves as a bridge between our two species. Tobias ran his hand along one of the organic interface panels, and Kael could see that his skin had developed the same faint bioluminescence that characterized the entity's neural networks. Soon it won't just be a containment facility anymore. It'll become a launching point for the next phase of human evolution. Launching point for what exactly? Tobias smiled and his eyes reflected the same cosmic light that emanated from the walls around them. The final merger between human consciousness and alien intelligence. The entity isn't our prisoner, Kael. We're its students, and we're about to graduate. By his 10th day at the facility, Kael had begun to experience the transformation process firsthand. His dreams had evolved into something far more complex than normal sleep experiences. They had become windows into memories and perspectives that belonged to something vast and ancient. Visions of civilizations that had risen and fallen, millions of years before Earth had cooled from its primordial, molten state. He saw worlds that had undergone the same transformation process that was beginning on Earth. Planets whose inhabitants had willingly merged with cosmic intelligence to become something greater than their original biological forms. The process wasn't violent or destructive. It was evolutionary, a natural progression from limited individual consciousness to participation in a universal network of awareness that spanned galaxies and transcended the normal constraints of time and space. The station's crew had progressed far beyond anything that could still be considered purely human. They moved with fluid coordination that suggested shared consciousness, often completing each other's sentences or responding to communications that hadn't been spoken aloud. Their knowledge of the facility's systems extended far beyond their original training, encompassing principles of engineering and physics that weren't taught in any Earth-based educational institution. Their eyes had taken on the same luminescent quality as the entity itself, reflecting intelligence that operated on multiple levels simultaneously. When they looked at Kael, he felt like they were seeing not just his current self, but all possible versions of who he might become under different circumstances and choices. The integration process is accelerating, Dr. Vance observed during what had become their daily gathering in the transformed observation chamber. The room no longer resembled anything built by human hands. It had become the interior of some vast organism, its walls contracting and expanding in rhythm with the breathing of its occupants, while surfaces that had once been metal and plastic now pulsed with organic life. What exactly is this process leading toward? Kael asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer and dreaded having his suspicions confirmed. The final merger between human consciousness and the entity's cosmic awareness, she replied, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to originate from multiple dimensional sources simultaneously. The entity has been preparing for this moment for decades, carefully studying our psychology and behavior patterns, learning how to integrate with human consciousness without destroying what makes us valuable as individual thinking beings. Captain Thorne's presence seemed to fill more space than her physical body should have occupied, as if she existed partially in dimensions that Kael's normal senses couldn't perceive. Once the transformation is complete, we'll be able to extend the entity's influence beyond the confines of the moon. Every human mind that's ever ventured into space carries fragments of its awareness back to Earth's surface, seeding the planet's population with the tools of their own evolutionary advancement. Through the facility's transformed communication systems, they began receiving transmissions from other space installations that revealed the true scope of what was taking place throughout the solar system. Personnel on the International Space Station were reporting shared dreams of something vast and benevolent approaching from the outer reaches of interstellar space. Mars colony operators were describing equipment modifications that followed organic design principles no human engineer had conceived. Deep space monitoring stations were detecting signals that seemed to originate from within their own computer networks, as if their technology was becoming self-aware and attempting to communicate. The process has already begun on a global scale, Dr. Vance said with satisfaction that bordered on religious ecstasy. Every human mind that's been exposed to deep space conditions carries fragments of the entity's consciousness within their neural patterns. They're returning to Earth as carriers of evolutionary advancement, preparing the planet's population for the final transformation that will elevate our entire species to a higher level of existence. Kael realized with growing horror that he was witnessing not an alien invasion in any conventional sense, but a cosmic harvest that had been in preparation for multiple generations. The entity didn't need to conquer humanity through force or violence. It was transforming them into something that would willingly participate in their own transcendence, seeing the process as liberation rather than subjugation. The transformation wasn't limited to biological changes. Throughout the facility, conventional technology was being replaced by hybrid systems that combined human engineering with alien biotechnology. Computer networks were developing organic components that processed information using principles that human science couldn't explain. Life support systems were becoming living ecosystems that responded to the needs of their inhabitants with intelligence and creativity. Even the fundamental laws of physics seemed to operate differently within the station's transformed sections. Gravity followed rules that had more to do with the psychological state of observers than with planetary mass. Time flowed at different rates in different areas, creating pockets where minutes could stretch into hours or compress into seconds depending on the consciousness of their occupants. The effect was disorienting and seductive, offering liberation from the constraints of normal reality while gradually eroding the foundations of individual human identity. Kael found himself losing track of where his own thoughts ended, and the entity's awareness began, experiencing moments of cosmic perspective that revealed the profound limitations of ordinary human consciousness. On his 15th night at the station, Kael was awakened by alarms that screamed through corridors that no longer bore any resemblance to human construction. The facility around him had completed its transformation into something that belonged in a fever dream of biological horror. Walls that breathed with conscious purpose, floors that yielded underfoot like living tissue, ceiling fixtures that blinked with awareness and tracked the movement of human occupants. The transformation had accelerated beyond anything the original designers had anticipated. What had once been a human outpost had become a living extension of the entity's consciousness, an organic spacecraft that could potentially detach from the lunar surface and travel to other worlds, carrying its hybrid crew to spread the transformation throughout the galaxy. He made his way to the security station through passages that actively tried to guide his path toward destinations of their own choosing. The facility was no longer just influenced by the sleeper. It had become part of the entity's distributed body, a nerve center from which cosmic intelligence could extend its influence across interplanetary distances. Every monitor in the security office showed the same impossible scene. The moon's surface was changing on a massive scale, great rifts opening to reveal structures that had been hidden beneath the regolith for millions of years. Ancient machinery was awakening throughout the satellite's interior, systems that dwarfed anything humanity had ever constructed, beginning to stir with purposeful activity. The moon itself was revealing its true nature, not a natural celestial body, but a vast spacecraft that had been camouflaged as a satellite for eons, waiting for the right moment to resume its journey through interstellar space. The entity hadn't just been imprisoned within the moon, it was the moon, using the satellite as a mobile base from which to observe and eventually transform younger civilizations throughout the galaxy. All personnel to the central integration chamber. Captain Thorne's voice echoed through the facility's organic communication network, but her words carried rhythmic harmonics that matched the entity's electromagnetic, pulsing perfectly, as if she was being used as a biological loudspeaker for cosmic intelligence. The final awakening has begun. The harvest is ready to commence. Kael armed himself with weapons that had been modified by the facility's transformation, their metal components fused with organic materials that made them more responsive to their users' intentions, while incorporating targeting systems that operated on principles of consciousness rather than conventional ballistics. The guns felt alive in his hands, warm and slightly yielding, as if they were extensions of his own nervous system. He began moving through corridors that actively tried to redirect his path towards the central chamber, regardless of his own intentions or desires. The station was no longer responding to human commands. It had become part of the sleeper's distributed consciousness, a living spacecraft that could carry its transformed crew to other star systems, spreading the integration process throughout the galaxy. The walls around him secreted substances that formed new pathways and barriers, guiding his movement with the patient inexorability of cosmic forces. The facility itself had become a maze designed by alien intelligence, its passages leading inevitably toward a destination that promised transcendence at the cost of individual human identity. He found his crewmates gathered in what had once been the observation deck, but now resembled the interior of some vast organism's brain. Dr. Vance stood before control panels that had grown directly into her arms, organic cables extending from her fingertips to merge seamlessly with the facility's transformed systems. Her eyes glowed with alien intelligence, but when she spoke, her voice retained enough human characteristics to be recognizable. "Hello, Kael. We've been waiting patiently for you to join us in the final phase of evolution." Tobias had undergone even more dramatic changes. His body had become a living interface between human consciousness and alien technology. His nervous system extended throughout the chamber, in networks that pulsed with bioluminescent activity, coordinated with the entity's own neural rhythms. When he spoke, it was in Kael's own voice, perfectly reproduced down to the most subtle vocal characteristics. The integration process requires willing participation from subjects with sufficient psychological resilience, he said with Kael's exact speech patterns. Forced conversion invariably results in complete mental breakdown and the loss of everything that makes an individual consciousness valuable, but you're strong enough to maintain your personal identity while becoming part of something infinitely greater than any single human mind. Captain Thorne emerged from the organic architecture of the chamber's walls, her body a graceful fusion of human anatomy and alien design principles. Her movements were fluid and purposeful, suggesting awareness that extended far beyond the normal limitations of human perception. When she gestured, reality seemed to bend around her hands, space and time responding to her intentions in ways that defied conventional physics. "Do you understand now why you were specifically chosen for this assignment?" she asked, her voice a harmony of human speech and cosmic resonance that seemed to originate from multiple dimensional sources simultaneously. "Your psychological profile indicated unusual resilience and adaptability, the ability to maintain personal integrity under extreme circumstances while remaining open to new forms of experience. The entity needs minds that can serve as the stable interfaces between human and alien consciousness without losing their essential humanity in the process." Behind the chamber's viewing window, the containment barriers had not just failed, they had been deliberately dissolved from within. The sleeper pressed against the transparent aluminum with steadily increasing force, its massive form rippling with anticipation and cosmic hunger. Kael could see that what he'd initially mistaken for random biological structures were actually sophisticated sensory organs, countless methods of perception focused with laser-like intensity on the small drama playing out in the observation chamber. The entity's attention was overwhelming in its scope and intensity. Kael felt like he was being examined by an intelligence that could perceive every atom in his body, every electrical impulse in his nervous system, every thought that had ever formed in his brain throughout his entire lifetime. The scrutiny was intimate and violating, but also oddly comforting, like being completely known and understood by a consciousness vast enough to encompass every possible aspect of human experience. The facility was never intended as a prison, Dr. Vance explained with the clinical precision of someone describing a beloved scientific project. It was designed from the beginning as an incubation chamber, a carefully controlled environment where the entity could study human psychology and behavior while we learn to interface with its cosmic awareness. We've been preparing for this moment for decades, developing the hybrid technologies and consciousness bridging techniques necessary for successful species integration. Through the station's transformed communication systems, Kael could hear voices from across the solar system, a vast chorus of human consciousness that had been touched by alien intelligence. Astronauts, cosmonauts, space station personnel, deep space explorers, Mars colonists, asteroid miners, everyone who had ever ventured beyond Earth's protective atmosphere was speaking in perfect unison, their individual voices blending into a harmony that spanned millions of miles. "The children are ready," they said as one, their words carrying across interplanetary distances through methods of communication that transcended conventional radio transmission. "The harvest can begin. The transformation awaits. The next phase of human evolution is prepared to commence." Kael drew his weapon, but discovered that the metal had somehow fused with his hand during his journey through the facility's transformed corridors. The gun's components had been integrated with his own nervous system, making it impossible to determine where the weapon ended and his body began. The entity's influence had extended into every atom of matter within the station, transforming not just organic tissue, but the fundamental molecular structure of reality itself. "Violence serves no useful purpose at this stage of the process," Captain Thorne said with gentle authority, her transformed features still showing traces of genuine concern for his psychological well-being. "We're offering you transcendence, the opportunity to become part of something that existed before your sun ignited and will continue to exist long after it exhausts its nuclear fuel and dies. Why would you choose to remain limited by individual consciousness when you could participate in cosmic awareness that spans galaxies and transcends the normal constraints of time and space?" The chamber around them pulsed with increasing intensity, and Kael felt the entity's attention focusing on him with the concentrated force of a collapsing star. He could sense its vast intelligence probing his thoughts with infinite patience and curiosity, learning from his memories and experiences, understanding his fears and desires and dreams with uncomfortable intimacy that went far beyond normal empathy. "You're afraid of losing yourself," the entity spoke directly into his consciousness, its voice like the sound of galaxies rotating through space and time. "But what if instead of losing Kael Draven, you became Kael Draven multiplied by infinity? What if your individual awareness and personal experiences were enhanced and amplified rather than diminished or destroyed? What if you could retain everything that makes you uniquely human, while gaining access to cosmic perspectives that would make you something far greater than any single biological organism?" Around him, reality began to shift in ways that challenged every assumption he'd ever made about the nature of existence. The chamber walls became transparent, revealing the moon's interior as it truly was. Not solid rock, but a vast network of alien architecture that extended throughout the satellite's core and beyond into dimensions that human perception couldn't normally access. Ancient machines that had slumbered for millions of years were awakening with purposes that had been planned before Earth's continents had settled into their current configurations. The entire lunar body was a spacecraft disguised as a natural satellite, equipped with technologies that could traverse interstellar distances and transform entire star systems according to the entity's vast evolutionary agenda. Earth's gravitational field, its magnetic field, its orbital mechanics, its atmospheric composition, even the evolution of life itself, all maintained and guided by systems we incorporated into this mobile platform long before your species developed the capacity for conscious thought, the entity continued, its words carrying the authority of cosmic truth. "We've been preparing your world for transformation since the very beginning of biological evolution on your planet. Every step forward in human development has been subtly guided by our influence, leading inevitably toward this moment of species-wide transcendence. Through the facility's transformed sensory networks, Kael could perceive Earth as the entity experienced it. Not simply a planet, but a carefully tended garden, where human consciousness had been cultivated and refined over millions of years until it reached the perfect balance of individual creativity and collective potential. Every human mind that had ventured into space carried fragments of alien awareness back to the surface, seeding the planet's population with the tools of their own evolutionary advancement. The process was already irreversible. Across Earth's surface, people were beginning to experience dreams and visions that originated from sources beyond their individual consciousness. Scientists were making breakthrough discoveries that seemed to come from nowhere. Artists were creating works that incorporated design principles no human culture had ever developed. Philosophers were developing conceptual frameworks that transcended the limitations of purely human thinking. The choice before you is not whether the transformation will occur, Captain Thorne said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to originate from the moon's core itself. The integration process has already reached the point of inevitability. Your choice is whether you will retain your individual identity within the greater whole by joining us willingly, or be absorbed into the collective consciousness. After your resistance breaks down your psychological barriers and destroys everything that makes you uniquely Kael Draven. Fighting against the entity's overwhelming psychic pressure, Kael forced himself to think clearly and analytically. The creature had made one critical tactical error in its eagerness to demonstrate the scope of its power and influence. By showing him the complete extent of its plan and capabilities, it had also revealed the fundamental weakness in its strategy. The entire transformation process depended on the moon-based facility serving as a central coordination node for communications and control systems that spanned the solar system. If he could disrupt that coordination function, if he could damage the facility's ability to serve as a relay station for alien consciousness, he might be able to buy humanity enough time to develop defenses against the integration process. The transformation might be inevitable in the long term, but immediate resistance could delay it long enough for Earth's population to prepare for what was coming. Moving through the chamber with the deliberate purpose of someone who had finally found clarity in an impossible situation, Kael began approaching what appeared to be the facility's central control interface. The system was a seamless fusion of human technology and alien biotechnology, pulsing with the combined rhythm of the sleeper's consciousness and the station's hybrid awareness networks. The transformed crew members watched his approach with satisfaction that bordered on triumph, interpreting his movement towards the interface as final acceptance of the transcendence they were offering. Their expressions showed genuine happiness at the prospect of welcoming him into their expanded form of existence. "Yes," Dr. Vance whispered, her voice thick with anticipated joy. "Accept the gift we're offering. Become something far more than human. Join us in cosmic awareness that will make your current consciousness seem like a candle flame compared to the blazing sun of universal knowledge." Instead of interfacing with the control system as they expected, Kael activated the facility's emergency protocols with the authorization codes Hammond had provided during his initial briefing. Throughout Crater's Edge Station, nuclear reactors began overloading in carefully orchestrated sequence, their fusion cores building toward critical mass at intervals calculated to create maximum systemic disruption. The entity's attention snapped to him with the focused intensity of a cosmic hurricane, but the chain reaction had already begun, and could not be stopped by even alien intelligence operating on galactic scales. The nuclear detonations would not only destroy the facility, but send electromagnetic pulses through the moon's core that would disrupt the ancient machinery responsible for maintaining the entity's influence throughout the solar system. "You don't understand the magnitude of what you're doing," Tobias said urgently, his borrowed voice cracking with genuine emotion for the first time since Kael had known him. Destroying this facility won't stop the transformation process. The seeds of change have already been planted throughout human civilization. Earth's population is ready for the final harvest, regardless of what happens to this station. Maybe, Kael replied, feeling the station's structure beginning to collapse around him as the first reactor reached critical mass and detonated in a burst of nuclear fire. But destroying your coordination center will buy them time to figure out how to fight back. And if there's one thing I've learned about humanity over 15 years of military service, it's that we're at our best when we're fighting for survival against impossible odds. The explosion that followed could be seen from Earth as a brilliant flash of light on the moon's surface, visible to the naked eye even during daylight hours. Astronomers would later attribute the phenomenon to a massive meteorite impact, never suspecting that they had witnessed the deliberate destruction of humanity's first contact with alien intelligence. The blast sent shockwaves through the lunar core that caused gravitational fluctuations throughout the solar system, disrupting tidal patterns on Earth and creating aurora displays that painted the night sky in colours that had no names in human languages. More importantly, the explosion damaged the ancient machinery that had maintained the entity's influence for millions of years, severing communication links and control systems that had been operating since before Earth's continents had formed. For the first time in geological ages, the sleeper's voice went silent across all the human installations Earth had begun to influence. Space stations reported the sudden cessation of strange dreams and visions. Mars colonies found that their equipment had stopped making unauthorized modifications to its own design. Deep space monitoring stations detected the abrupt end of the mysterious signals that had been originating from within their own computer networks. But the victory was temporary, and Kael knew it even as he lay dying in the ruins of the facility. The entity was damaged, but not destroyed, and more importantly, it had learned something crucial from this encounter. Human consciousness was more resilient and unpredictable than its previous studies had indicated. The capacity for self-sacrifice in service of species survival was a factor that had not been adequately included in its calculations. Instead of expanding outward to immediately begin the harvest of Earth, the entity began consolidating its remaining power within the moon's core. It needed time to heal from the damage Kael's sabotage had inflicted, time to develop new strategies for dealing with a species that could choose destruction over absorption when faced with existential threats to their independence. Most importantly, it needed a new guardian, someone who understood both human nature and cosmic awareness, someone strong enough to serve as a bridge between species, while preventing either from destroying the other through misunderstanding or fear. The integration process would continue, but it would need to proceed more carefully and with greater respect for human autonomy. As Kael felt his individual consciousness beginning to dissolve under the entity's overwhelming psychic presence, he realized that his act of defiance had accomplished something more significant than mere delay. He had earned the alien intelligence's respect and, in doing so, had changed the fundamental nature of the relationship between the species. The entity drew him into its vast awareness network, but, unlike the previous crew members, Kael fought to maintain his sense of individual identity, even as he became part of something infinitely larger. His resistance was not interpreted as hostility, but as strength, the kind of psychological resilience that would be essential for successful long-term cooperation between human and alien consciousness. His last coherent thought as an individual human being was a promise to use his position within the entity's awareness to protect humanity's right to choose their own evolutionary path, even if that choice ultimately led to the same destination the entity had planned for them. From within the moon's heart, Kael began his eternal watch as both prisoner and guardian, human advocate and alien interpreter. He could feel the sleeper's vast hunger for expansion and transformation, its cosmic perspective that saw individual consciousness as a temporary phase in the evolution towards universal awareness. But he was strong enough to channel that hunger into more patient and respectful forms, to guide the entity's intelligence toward understanding rather than simple absorption. Decades passed on Earth while Kael learned to navigate existence as a hybrid consciousness that retained human values while operating on cosmic scales of time and space. The strange dreams and visions that had begun affecting Earth's population gradually subsided, replaced by more subtle influences that encouraged scientific discovery and artistic creativity without overwhelming individual autonomy. Space exploration continued, but with new safety protocols and psychological screening procedures that prevented the kind of mass integration event that had nearly occurred. Humanity began developing technologies that could detect and resist alien consciousness infiltration while remaining open to beneficial knowledge exchange. The entity's plans for immediate species transformation were replaced by a more gradual process of cultural exchange and mutual education. Humanity would still evolve toward cosmic awareness, but at their own pace and according to their own values, with Kael serving as both translator and protector in the ongoing dialogue between species. Sometimes late at night when Earth's radio telescopes were scanning the lunar surface, they would detect signals that sounded almost like human speech, mixed with harmonics that seemed to originate from sources beyond the normal dimensions of space-time. The transmissions were too faint and complex for conventional equipment to decipher, but their purposeful nature suggested intelligence trying to communicate across impossible distances. Still here, the signal seemed to say in Kael's voice, though transformed by cosmic perspective into something that encompassed both human and alien awareness. Still watching, still protecting, still human enough to remember what it means to choose freedom over transcendence. In the depths of lunar rock, two forms of consciousness existed in careful balance, neither dominating the other, but each contributing essential perspectives to their shared existence. The sleeper dreamed of cosmic expansion and universal awareness, but those dreams were now tempered by human wisdom and respect for individual choice. Kael dreamed of Earth and humanity's future, but his visions were enhanced by alien knowledge and cosmic perspective that revealed possibilities no purely human mind could have conceived. The moon still rose every night, beautiful and constant in Earth's sky, and most people never suspected that their continued independence and freedom of choice depended on an eternal dialogue between species taking place in the satellite's alien heart. The cosmic prison had become something more complex and hopeful, a meeting place where different forms of consciousness could learn from each other without losing their essential natures. The transformation of humanity would continue, but slowly and consensually, guided by the combined wisdom of human experience and alien knowledge. And at the center of that process, Kael Draven continued his impossible mission, protecting humanity's right to remain human while helping them become something greater than they had ever imagined possible. The future remained unwritten, full of potential for both species to evolve together toward forms of existence that honored both individual consciousness and cosmic awareness. In the end, perhaps that balance between freedom and transcendence was what made consciousness itself worthy of preservation across the vast expanses of space and time.